Hello and welcome to the podcast. So, just a quick note on the Mathew Sullivan case. I do mention about an extra company that's kind of connected to them, and I'll go into this on the podcast. Unfortunately, haven't had time because the Pentagon released the UFO files, so I've been kind of looking over all of those. But the company that I was referring to is Austin Industries. Now, Austin Industries hold the construction contracts for Los Alamos National Laboratory and also SpaceX. And whilst it may not be totally relevant to the case, I think when I see something like that, I feel the need that I should state it because if I don't, I think it's kind of neglecting information that other people might build some sort of connection with between things that I've overlooked. And I think it's relevant just to state, look, I did find some sort of connection to this. The connection I found was actually via a LinkedIn on one of the profiles of someone who was on, who I suspect, which you'll see in the episode, who I suspect was that Mathew worked for their company. So when I looked in on their LinkedIn, I seen someone who also worked previously in a high up position for the Austin Industries. Now, I haven't been able to get back on that. I think maybe they've changed their profiles to private or something. I don't know, since maybe recently, maybe a few people are doing it. I'm not sure. But as I say, I just feel that's kind of of note. And also in the UFO files that's released by the Pentagon, I was kind of underwhelmed on these. The videos were very similar to all the MQ-9 Reaper drone footage sort of stuff. And I'll go into this on a podcast in the future. The next one will be on David Hicks, and then I'll start touching on the Pentagon UFO files. But there was some the interesting parts I find were actually in the statements from UFO reports from perhaps I think some of them in the 60s, 70s, maybe even the 50s. There was some quite interesting aspects to that, which I'll touch on, as I say, when I do the podcast for that. But yeah, like and subscribe. I hope you enjoy the podcast, and thanks for listening. So in this episode, we're looking into the death of former Air Force intelligence officer, Bronze Star recipient, and a potential UFO whistleblower, Mathew Sullivan. So we'll start with a quick bio as normal, and then the case summary and analysis. So Mathew started his military career in the 17th Training Wing and 1st Fighter Wing of the 27th Squadron. He was a US Air Force intelligence officer assigned at the National Air and Space Intelligence Center as a deputy director at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. A direct overlap with McCasland, perhaps. Who knows? They may have worked together there. It's plausible they were at if they were there at the same time, likely they would have been in direct communication with each other because those departments kind of very in sync. Also, he worked at the NSA. He's had deployments to US Central Command and US Indo-Pacific Command. He earned his Bronze Star for valor in Operation Enduring Freedom. This was the US government's first stage in the Afghanistan War, the operational dates between about 2001 2014. He was also a writer. I believe his most popular book was Midnight at the Bright Ideas Bookstore, which I have to note, a key character called Joey in the beginning unalives himself. I don't know if it's relevant, but it might be worth note that. Also, he wrote the book Midnight in Soap Lake. This was his second book. It's a psychological thriller that's grounded in real-world conspiracies. Like and subscribe and comment. I'm loving all the comments, getting some good ideas. So coming up, I'm going to follow up on some of these, like the religious pastors who had a meeting with some representatives, apparently, about possible disclosure. There was another case that slipped my mind, which I'm going to look into either next or the one after next as well, that's kind of related to this, the McCasland disappearance pattern. And further to that, there's one that I really want to look into, which is Dr. Beatrice Villarreal, who done that peer-reviewed paper about these satellites or these objects in orbit before Sputnik, when she looked in hindsight at some of these things. So that's what's coming up. Also, there will be a podcast going about this. There will be more information in the podcast than in the video on this one. On the previous one, Garcia, I don't think there's much in there unless I can add something in. But the podcast to be a combination of these two, so there should be some decent material that's not in the videos on there. Like and subscribe, and thanks for all the support. Now, it's hard to find a clear career pathway for Mathew, which again is not surprising given the secretive nature of his work. People in these industries, as I've mentioned previously, and their sort of security clearance, do have much less of a digital footprint. But he did work for a company. I did find out. I think he worked for a company called Acquisition Systems Associates, which I do have the LinkedIn page, which I'll put up. This company is a SETA contractor. Now, this means systems engineering and technical assistance contractor for government agencies, particularly aerospace and defence. Now, SETAs do not build products. Instead, they offer objective, independent expertise to support acquisition strategies, project management, and technical analysis. I'll note at this point, Mathew also was apparently part of the so-called Legacy UFO program, the US government's crash retrieval program. So he worked here. He worked at the so-called Legacy program, and then went on to a private contractor working in a similar area. Well, here's a company write-up of theirs, and let's see what you think. ASA is a certified small business SETA contractor providing professional engineering, technical, scientific, programming management and acquisition management services to the federal government. We work closely with our federal clients and partners to provide efficient and scalable solutions that achieve and sustain mission success. Our integrated solutions provide the requisite services to implement and execute the mission objectives and associates strategic initiatives within the shortest practical timeline. Sounds kind of like quick retrieval systems, but I don't. Yeah, here's their website as well. They also have an interesting job opening, which I'll put on the screen there. Maybe I should apply for it. Yeah. Now, I looked through, and there seems to be connections between this company and also Booz Allen Hamilton Inc., which is an American advanced technology and management consulting firm headquartered in McLean, Virginia. It was founded in 1914, is one of the world's oldest consulting firms, and now primarily serves the U.S. government in sectors including defense, intelligence, and civil missions. One thing I did note, however, is that the stock of Booz Allen dropped by 57% since almost exactly Trump's election. And you can see a clear drop there. I don't know what this suggests, whether it's a changing government contractor or something, maybe something else, I don't know. I just think, the timing is pretty much exact with that election date. And it's just an observation. I'm not sure if it's entirely relevant, but felt the need to include it because there was a clear correlation there between the stock price. I suppose it goes to the depths of how much we kind of look into things. Acquisition Systems Associates Inc. is not a publicly traded company, so no data on this. What is an interesting link is that this company also works in conjunction with Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So you can see, and I'll pop it up, there's different mission objectives of theirs as a company, and I'll leave that up there for a second, but you can see here there's one that says 704 Test Group, Aerospace Survivability and Safety Office, Research, Development, Acquisition, Test and Evaluation. 1st of the 1st, 2021 to present, our team conducts survivability analysis supported by high fidelity modelling. And so essentially, yes, this 704 test group, this likely would have fallen. This was essentially at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and it would have fallen under Neil McCasland's authority at Wright-Patterson as well. It is the exact sort of department. But McCasland had left Wright-Patterson well before this started. I think, was it 2014 he left? I can't recall fully. But so he left well before this, which has a start date of 2021. And though he did start, like McCasland did, kind of went on to contract work from there in his post-military work, and likely did cross paths in the same field. But, as a devil's advocate here, these defence contractors do overlap frequently, and you can read almost too much into some data, and it's inevitable there would be some overlap here. The US military relies heavily on these contractors, and a lot of their work is essential for safety of the personnel. So there is there is a benefit and usefulness behind these contractors. And whilst I agree it's a little strange, these specific overlaps, especially in career history and the portfolio of the contractors and everything that's connected, we can't say anything with certainty here about any hypothetical crash retrieval sort of programs, as the whole classified defense ecosystem is closely intertwined anyway. There was another company called Austin Industries, and I'll go into that further on the podcast. Now I have to note these companies are both in the same area, ASA and the Bose Allen Hamilton, along with the Pentagon and the White House as well. Obviously they're in Virginia, just around Washington area. And also Matthew's home was in this rough area as well. So I've kind of plotted these on a map just for illustrative purposes. And you can see there where they're all located. I've tried to get them the right resolution, each picture, but clearly not. So is this relevant? Maybe, maybe not. I imagine, what I would say is, I would imagine somewhere like this is very secure in terms of foreign agents operating in this area, especially near the White House, the Pentagon, all these contractors in this area. I can't imagine some sort of foreign agency would really last too long in this kind of area. Everything will be heavily monitored. It just might be of note. But, I've detracted somewhat from the bio. So Mathew was rumoured to have worked on the so-called Legacy program, also for DARPA, the Defence Advanced Research Projects Agency, and also was due to give evidence to Congress in the November of 2024, the congressional hearing on UFOs. But he passed away on May 12th, 2024, 6 months prior to the hearing. Clearly, Mathew was a very intelligent person with a lot of credentials. And a lot of honour given his service record, etc. So, and especially with his security clearance as well. So that made the potential disclosure that he might have done very interesting indeed. Maybe we'll look at that another day, or I'll delve into it and see what I can find out for the podcast. So about the case. Mathew reportedly passed away from self-unalival by a cocktail of alcohol and the drugs alprazolam, cyclobenzaprine, and imipramine. There doesn't seem to be much released about his medical records, etc., which, I state in other cases in self-unalivals isn't really of suspicion. It's at the family's discretion in such circumstances, so it's truly hard to grasp any information. And also for the toxicology, I'm not sure where the source of the information is from on this, but it's widely reported by several established newspapers who generally do check the sources. So if we presume this is legitimate, then we can kind of ask the question, well, what else does this tell us about this case? So let's examine this. The alprazolam is a benzodiazepine normally prescribed for anxiety, panic disorder, acute stress, and sometimes insomnia. Cyclobenzaprine, a centrally acting muscle relaxant, normally prescribed for muscle spasms, back pain, neck tension, injury recovery, or stress-related muscular tension. Imipramine, despite what the sensationalized reports describing it primarily as a drug used in children for anxiety and bedwetting, imipramine is actually an older tricyclic antidepressant. So it's commonly used in adults for depression, anxiety, chronic pain, and sleep-related disorders. Its pediatric use would generally involve more clinical scrutiny than some press coverage may imply. With it being a tricyclic antidepressant, which is basically an older antidepressant than most modern ones, this implies that it's possible other medications were tried and failed at first. Then he kind of moved on to this older generation of antidepressant. These are mainly used for depression, anxiety, panic disorder, chronic pain, neuropain, insomnia, and historically, as I say, childhood bedwetting, which is what the papers are kind of ran with to make it look more obscure than what the actual facts point to. So when you combine all three of these, you get a general picture of someone who has, and this is presumptuous, you get a general picture of someone who has a history of anxiety or chronic stress with physical manifestations of these. Hence the muscle relaxants. Now, one thing of note is the alprazolam plus alcohol. This is a major issue. The FDA warns not to mix these two due to potential life-threatening effects. It's essentially a benzodiazepine mixed with alcohol. And the imipramine mixed with alcohol can also cause sudden cardiac arrhythmia, seizures, coma, and death. But, this combination of medication itself is not unusual, and it's less scrutinized medically than when you deal with something like opioids or something. Essentially, it wouldn't necessarily raise the eyebrow of a pharmacist going with a prescription for these. So was this just an accidental overdose? Whilst perhaps he took these and consumed some alcohol, he may have been stressed about the upcoming hearing and any number of things in relation to his life. Was this simply just a tragic accident of an overdose, mixed with alcohol? The one thing to note here, though, is when taking medication, people generally build a tolerance to such things. So if we take a general prescription timeline, for his presentation, we'd likely to see him prescribed alprazolam first to help with the anxiety and panic. Then as it continues and manifests physically, perhaps move to the cyclobenzaprine after. And that would help with the tension and muscle spasms, etc. in the sleep. And then finally introduce the imipramine for longer term management. But as I stated earlier, that imiprazine isn't really the go-to drug. It's an older class of drug, so he probably would have tried something else and then gone on to this. And that suggests really that in this hypothetical timeline, he was likely taking these drugs for some time. Therefore, you've got like a long-term stable use, and we generally confer some sort of tolerance to these drugs. And it may reduce the likelihood of an accidental unalival at ordinary prescribed doses. So I find this strange that he could have been taking these in the long term and then succumbed to an accidental unalival. So then the question becomes, was this deliberate self-unalival? And if that's the case, then the plausibility of something more sinister at play becomes more plausible also. You've got to ask yourself, if this is a deliberate action, it could be a deliberate action from different directions. Ultimately, though, this combination of drugs is lethal, as we've seen. But what was the reason behind this? I mean, it's clear whatever way you look at this, that he was either anxious, stressed, or depressed, or a combination of all three of these. So someone in that mental state is prone to self-unalival. It's a tragic given. But if you also assume that this was deliberate in some way, say whether that be him or someone else, then it opens up the possibility of the initial obvious conclusion that he himself is the administrator of these, or possibly someone else. Given his work history, the other connections going on here, it's hard to say either way on this. But I do feel it could be a tragic case of someone who struggled and ultimately succumbed to this, and it's incredibly tragic, and I really wish his family and friends all the best. I've said this before, no one, no matter who we are, is immune to this kind of, these stresses, especially when you're in these higher stress jobs and positions he's in with certain knowledge clearance and all the rest of it. It must be hard, mentally. I've stated previously, and I'll say again, these are strange cases, the links between them all. But I don't think all of them are suspicious. And this is just a personal opinion on this. But I don't think all of them are suspicious. And I don't think all of them aren't. There is some suspicion here. And it's just filtering out those that are plausible and those that aren't. But ultimately, we don't know either way. And perhaps maybe ultimately none of them are actually suspicious, or a majority of them are, or further. We don't know either way, and it's just looking into these to give a best guess, really. Hello and welcome back. So in this video we're looking at Steven Garcia. So I'll start with a quick bio, then a case summary. And remember, I know there may be other details that some may deem very relevant, but I'm looking only really at the verifiable sources of information. I have received a comment about certain details in other cases, and have to reiterate that whilst the other details would be extremely relevant if true, I only want to deal with those details that are verifiable. Less of the kind of hearsay stuff. But again, I will include that where I think it's kind of relevant, where there's enough of the hearsay. But I will say that also that it's totally uncorroborated as well. I will state that. There was also one common question in some details, and I have to state my sources are from publicly cited articles, statements, police reports, that kind of thing. And if someone knows something different, I suggest you report it directly to the police and the news outlets. You know, the news outlets and the sources that I use for the details in these sort of cases can be taken with a reasonable amount of weight. Is if they come under strict libel laws, they work in conjunction with law enforcement more closely than, frankly, me, and I'm sure most of us do. So again, if you do have details that suggest that any of the commonly accepted details are different than that's actually stated, I suggest you report these and not just write a comment on a random YouTube video. So again, I will state where there are potential relevant details, but it's unsubstantiated. Okay. At the same time, again, hesitant to provide excessive amounts of these types of details so as not to skew the case data. Like and subscribe and comment. Let me know in the comments of anything I may have missed. Though remember, be polite here. This is a community and every comment and point of view is welcome, except when it has some level of malice behind it. That won't be tolerated. You'll be blocked immediately. You know, those people aren't welcome here. You know, but yeah, comment on any extra details I may have missed. It'd be interesting to read if there are further details like that, and perhaps maybe verify those and do an addendum later. Okay, down to business. The biography of Steven Garcia is thus: age 48, living in Cattell Court, Southwest in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Now, I have to state, this address data is uncorroborated and is mostly found on blogs, perhaps due to privacy laws, that kind of thing. So I'm unsure how reliable it is, but it does seem to be a running theme throughout a few. And I think, obviously, if people know that kind of area and the person involved, I think that is something that could quite easily, legitimately be corroborated, you know, through different sort of checks. Obviously, being so far away, I don't have access to the same information as some people do, and I don't know how certain regulations work to validate these sort of things. But it does seem fairly consistent. You can get a grasp roughly of people within that area if they're all saying the same thing then. So, quick sidetrack here. The current disappearances within this area, Albuquerque, is that of Neil McCasland. In the wider area, but still deemed local, so the state of New Mexico, is that of Melissa Cassius and Anthony Chavez. Now, I have to state as well, these are all missing persons and not unalived people, which I feel is quite interesting, that they all meet the same case criteria. And also certain case details are very similar, as we'll see. Also, on a statistical note, for Los Alamos County, which apparently is one of the safest counties in the US, concerning those cases of Cassius and Chavez, statistically, only 0 to 2 people should be missing after 1 year. So that long-term missing criteria as a statistical sort of analysis on that. This area should only really have 0 to 2 people. Now, there's 2 people there straight away. And I think Los Alamos has different transparency laws. So in terms of missing people data, certainly from my perspective over here, I struggle to find any other kind of reports on that as such. So it'd be interesting to see if there are further cases in this area outside of those 2, because then that skews the overall statistical picture of this, and it certainly would indicate perhaps something more sinister or less sinister if it does fit in there. Maybe that's just, again, it falls within that realm of statistical plausibility. Yeah, so unfortunately I don't have the time to search every database for missing persons, and again, it would be very interesting to see the statistical difference. I would say if anyone does kind of like go along this approach, I think the best sort of method would be to check a period covering probably the previous 5 to 10 years to get a rough comparison on average, and then compare it with the 12-month period that these have gone missing as well. And I would measure it from the first to the last and see if you can marry that up with the same time frame period going back 5 to 10 years. Now, for Bernalillo County, that's that of Albuquerque, it seems there are quite a lot of missing persons here. And very, very unfortunately, there seems to be a lot of issue here with missing persons within the Native American community, which seems very unusually high there, which is very unfortunate. But for the statistical data, it should be around 7 to 20 long-term missing for this size of population. And we have two here also. So when you combine these two sort of counties and the statistical average of the number of people there compared to what should be expected, is roughly about 18 to 44% of missing persons are kind of related to this McCasland disappearance pattern of what would be expected statistically for these two counties. But I will say this is slightly spurious, though, as the actual numbers aren't known. As I say, I've not looked into that, so it's really just a broad speculative calculation. So back to the bio. Steven was working as a government contractor tied to the Kansas City National Security Campus, which is also part of the National Nuclear Security Administration. Think defensive nuclear weapons and their stewardship, or even perhaps naval nuclear propulsion. I believe that can still fall under this department. Also, Kansas City National Security Campus manufactures the majority of the non-nuclear components of the military's nuclear weapons. Again, this is pretty reliable sources, and it's been confirmed across multiple different sources as well. I haven't been able to find the exact company he worked for because he worked as a contractor, but there is a LinkedIn profile for a Steven Garcia in Albuquerque for a company called VWR, who is a subsidiary of Avantor. Now, Avantor provide laboratory supplies to advanced tech industries and various facilities, including government ones. And also VWR International is the distribution and logistics arm of the company. Now, reputable sources place him as a property custodian with high security clearance across different complexes, which also matches with that profile of VWR. But it also seems that Honeywell is the primary contractor for the Kansas City National Security Campus, although he could have been a subcontractor to these, and that's fairly common, and also it has been quite well established that he had access to sensitive sites. So, secondly, there doesn't seem to be any information about him. So there's not really any education history, employment history other than his current role. And again, this is from reliable sources, not from hearsay or blogs. I think something like that, it has to be kind of like definitive. If it's not really widely reported in news media and police statements and various records, then I think something like that you can more in the side of speculation, and it might skew things. But so doesn't seem to be any education history, employment history other than his current role, and this fits similar to that of Chavez and other cases. Other cases of those that may possibly have worked in very sensitive areas, which also aligns a lot with internet traceability for security reasons. So you often find people with these high security clearance professions have very limited social media and internet sort of traceability and a footprint, because for that security clearance, and especially the higher you go up that clearance level, you really need to watch what you're doing, because I suppose it ultimately comes down to your job and like certain blackmail aspects and numerous things like that could compromise your clearance. So his last appearance was on the 28th of August 2025, where he was last seen walking out of his home in Cattell Court, southwest in Albuquerque, approximately just after 9 a.m. He was reportedly carrying a handgun in green camouflage shirt and shorts. And again, this is kind of reported in reputable sources, but also a bit of blogs. I think there's enough information out there to say that this could be pretty reliable. This is also similar to other cases, though, where he left behind his phone, wallet, keys, and car, and leaving with a weapon as well. I think McCasland, that was what happened in McCasland's case. And who knows, the others might have done that. It just wasn't reported. But yeah, so in terms of this kind of report, I've no idea where the source of the information actually is, and I can't seem to find a police statement or any definitive witness that states this. It's just what's kind of been reported to the press by multiple in multiple independent news sources, and I think that goes to the reliability of that it is multiple ones, and these people do have access to certain information behind closed doors that we just don't do. And I think if they're reporting it in multiple reputable news sources, then I think you can kind of take it with a degree of reliability. But again, so this case really fits the pattern of disappearances in this area from McCasland, Cassius, Chavez, leaving items behind, leaving with he had a weapon in this case. McCasland had one. Who knows? The others might have. There's a clear pattern between these. He stops going from one suspicious to three not suspicious, and I think he starts erring towards maybe three, possibly four, even being suspicious. Whenever they're all so similar in such a small area, working within the same environment or the similar, certainly adjacent environments, I think you've got to question you've got to question this a little bit. So I've pinned these on a map, and we can see the various different locations. So here we can see, this is where I pinpointed the workplace for Garcia. Now this is actually, I believe this is Honeywell. It could be, but as I say, Honeywell seems to be the primary contractor for where he worked, and he could have subcontracted to there, which kind of stands to reason why he'd worked there. And you can see it's a very secure facility, next to no windows, only a few small ones at the front, and they look very, very solid. And you can see this one of his local area where he was reportedly to have lived. You can see that these are quite nice. It's quite a nice area. So I suppose that kind of speaks to his seniority in his profession and kind of corroborates that, really. Here's the location of that in terms of its relation to Albuquerque. It's the town or city, I'm not too sure. And you can see here his work location. For a reference, I'll put on, here is McCasland's home location. Here is Chavez's, and here is Cassius, and here they all are on one map, which shows the entirety, and I suppose it just illustrates how close these cases are to each other. Now, again, some of the strange things in this case is the lack of data. I've recently been looking into some other missing persons, not related to the McCasland disappearance pattern, which I will be doing a few videos on after this series. I believe Mathew Sullivan might be the next case I'll be doing, and that's very interesting as well. But in terms of the other ones, I'm enjoying, I'm enjoying the true crime aspect to some of these cases, and I think I probably will do a few more videos on perhaps like just unrelated to the McCasland disappearance pattern and stuff like that. Just perhaps the stranger sort of cases, the missing persons and the unalival sort of cases that are I find a bit weird, that maybe we can kind of look into together. So the lack of information that's readily available to the public is apparent in a lot of these cases. In pretty much all of these cases, there's a clear lack of information. As I say, in comparison to the ones I've been looking at, there's massive gap in information. So that makes me question things. Perhaps these are in witness protection or something. That could be a thought. But then I looked into the standard procedures, or normally witness protection, that kind of thing. All their belongings, all the stuff is acquired and sent to the new location. But then I suppose in extreme cases, would exceptions be made for these high risk sort of government associated people? Maybe. What about foreign agencies targeting these people, abducting them for information or along those lines? They all work in similar adjacent fields, possibly. But I think these are very secure areas. You're talking about Los Alamos, that kind of area, even Albuquerque. There's a lot of government, I think one statistic said it's about 80% of missile manufactured components, non-nuclear parts, were manufactured there. If you have foreign agencies operating within these areas, of such national importance, I can't really see it. There'd be too much risk associated with that, and too many people in the surrounding area that would just be monitoring and watching movements for this exact reason. You know, these are some of the highest security labs in the country. I can't see this being really too plausible. What about contractors? Well, these do operate in these areas. With any like defense work comes contractors, and these can easily bypass local suspicions from those monitoring the area. But then you got to question why. You know, and it's the same argument as if it was the US, the military itself. You know, they have means to arrest people, discredit, etc., that kind of thing. That I don't think they would need to do this. In all honesty, there are plenty of other ways to remove someone they want removing without making them disappear. Both of these points between the military and contractors are, you know, you got to ask these questions. Why not make these look like self-unalivals if that was the goal? You know, so as not to raise suspicions, perhaps. You know, but then again, so many self-unalivals falls outside the bell curve, so they'd have to distribute their actions. But again, that kind of contradicts 4 missing persons, because if you've got 4 missing persons, that falls out the bell curve. So I don't see the logic of that either. You know, why wouldn't you do 2 that disappear and 2 unalival? Perhaps they did all run away somewhere together for some reason that we don't know. You know, I know it's stagnated. Perhaps there's something. I mean, obviously, there's a lot we don't know that's going on in the background. You know, one thing that is for sure is this does look suspicious. And as I've said on other videos, I don't know if every case is. Personally, I feel it insinuates that at least one is like suspicious. But I think that would be a minimum threshold when you're dealing with 4 cases in such a small area. Then if you admit that one could be suspicious, you kind of have to go with, well, there's a plausible element that perhaps all 4 could. But I think that would be an extreme case. It's impossible to say, but I think statistically it seems quite strange. I think the patterns within themselves, they all fit the same sort of procedure criteria, and case, the lack of case information on each of them that's what released is all very similar. There's too many similarities, I feel, in these. Something isn't adding up here either way. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Hopefully the next one comes out soon. I'm going to get looking on that now. And as I say, going forward, I think I'm going to delve into, probably outside the McCasland disappearance pattern, but a bit of more true crime stuff. But please comment below and let me know what you think, if you'd like to see a bit more of the true crime thing, because it certainly, I've got a bit of interest in it. Or if you'd like me to focus primarily on ones related to the UFO phenomena.